Clay, we've been strategizing on Urban View from day one. It's always been about
Absolutely.
strategy. Get your money together, get your passport. But we've been putting down. I mean, we got Chief Strategist Larry Daniel Favors, who has a whole center for law and social justice around strategizing with the census and how we move. And people argue about those things. They don't want
Yeah.
to even do the basic things. So it gets a little frustrating.
So at
A
the
little
end
bit.
of my book, The Grift, I have a what's next chapter. And to Charles' point, a lot of the answers are in the original Black Republicans. I mean, the original Black. That's why it's so. I'm sure Frederick Douglass is rolling in his grave at the likes of Tim Scott and all those other clowns on steroids, because the original Black Republicans, it's almost like, Charles and I just won on this one. They were about building public education. They were about thriving Black communities. They were about politicians being held accountable by their community. The first Black man in Congress is Hiram Revels. He's a United States Senator from Mississippi. How does that happen? Because the state of Mississippi was majority Black, and they told the state legislature, you better put a Black man in the United States Senate. Because back then they were appointed by the state legislature, not the people. They weren't elected that way. You got to do this because we made sure that Ulysses S. Grant was what was elected. You must do this. And these are white folks in the 1860s, 1870. He's in the Senate. They listened. This was a majority Black state. And then we talk about building public and like you said, the demand wasn't for us to all be the same, all to be integrated, if you will. The demand was that we were able to control our own communities. But here's where it gets sketchy to me. Of course, we know in 1877, Reconstruction fails. And we had a thriving community. But there were forces, once the North pulls out of the South, there's no more federal troops, decimates these communities. So I would hope that, let's say we're on the tip of the end of Reconstruction. This is where we get to you and I and Charles and this planning and strategizing. We have more resources than we had in 1877. There was no Charles Coleman with his amazing eyewear on MSNBC in 1877. There was no Karen Hunter on a radio airwaves in 1877. A book like mine, it might get banned in Florida or Texas, wouldn't even come out. So we have more power than kind of what I was saying before, Karen. I feel like we have more power then. I'm sorry, we had less power then and used it more. We have more power now and using it less. But what I will say, and I'll say this, is that my concern is because we haven't copied our ancestors and went to their amazing blueprint, that if we do get to a point where this man is reelected, like Lerone Bennett Jr. said, my concern is it's the final road not taken. And I don't know where to go from there because it is January of 2024. People have tried. And then we have these fractures. Douglas talked about this in our communities. You're not Black enough if both your parents weren't born here. You aren't Black enough if you're gay, if you're trans. This degrees of Blackness. What makes you the leader? What makes you the follower? We are fractured people, so I struggle with the after because what happened in the other after was complete terror. So that's why I'm ringing the alarm now.
I think that those are all very good points. And one of the caveats that I always talk about when I have an opportunity to discuss this is that returning to the model of right after Reconstruction requires a vigilant stance around get out of our way, leave us be. Because the leave us be part is where you talked about our communities that we ended up building up being destructed. And being destroyed is because we weren't allowed to be. So that in present day, that last piece of give us our wood, our hammer, our saw, and allow us to construct what is ours and what we want for ourselves has to come with a demand of and get out of our way so that we can do so lawfully and encumbered.
Let's go one
But
step. It has to come with self-defense.
right there, but there's a very important point of nuance here that I think a lot of us who may be listening don't necessarily consider, and they're all tied together. Number one, this did not occur overnight, and it will not be solved overnight. So patience is an ally, right? Like patience and being steadfast and committed is an ally. And why do I say that? Because people who ask us questions like this or ask me questions like this want something that is viable, that can turn everything around in one election cycle. That is not realistic at all.
The long game.
The long game is the only way that we are able to develop, implement, and execute a strategy. It's like that saying, I'm planting seeds that will grow trees, the shade of which I will never sit under. This is something that is being built or has to be rebuilt for generations to come. And I think that if anyone out there is expecting that within one election cycle or two or three, that somehow our political ideology is going to shift that into a way or a space that liberates all of Black America, you are living in a farce. That is a dream world. The reason why that's important is because it is becoming, at least from my perspective, and you guys can feel free to disagree with me on this if you choose, this is becoming increasingly not viable under the current two-party system. I don't necessarily know that people who are looking at this in a binary model of Democrat, Republican are seeing the long game in a way that is going to allow us to get to where we need to go.
They're not.
And when people start, like people, you talk about third-party candidates or you talk about moderates, independents, what have you, it gets people skittish because the number one thing that they say is, well, they can't win. And I say that's why you have to have patience to understand strategy and how systems works. Let me give you an example. I was very disappointed with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And the reason I was disappointed was because I felt like it had the potential to be the response on the left to what the Tea Party was on the right. It politically could have held the left in a chokehold the way the Tea Party held the right in a chokehold. They held congressional legislators in a chokehold for the duration of Barack Obama's tenure in office. Where am I going with this? I will use Black Lives Matter as an example, not the organization. I'm talking about the premise, generally speaking, okay? There is nothing that stops progressive Blacks or conservative Blacks for that matter, because right now there is a strong faction of conservative leaning Black Americans who are socially conservative, who believe in fiscal austerity and other things of that nature that align traditionally with Republican politics, who are not messing with Trump. They are not going to capitulate. They are not going to kowtow. They don't particularly like Biden, but they are not messing with Trump. And as far as a political home, they have nowhere to go. So I'm not talking necessarily about specifically progressives or conservatives. I'm saying anyone for that matter who feels like neither party speaks directly to them. From a national point, building a movement where you have a platform that you are committed to, getting people elected across the country. Are you going to rival Democrats in Congress? No, you're not. Are you going to rival Republicans in Congress? No, you're not. But you can build a big enough faction where if they need stuff done, be it Democrats or Republicans, you have the ability to put your thumb on the scale. And now they got to come to you about the things that you want. And now you have more control over the agenda. That's strategy. The Tea Party was never going to be big enough to actually take over the Republican Party, but they were big enough to have its influence and its fingerprints all over the Republican Party. And if you're talking about what an immediate strategy looks like, that's one of the things that I would offer, because too many of us right now are just looking at it in a binary two-party system way. And to me, that's not where our win is.
Can I add something? Is that okay, Karen?
Yeah.
I feel a little different about this, Charles. And the reason why is because I actually don't think, let me be careful saying this. I don't think it's totally about the two-party system, because I cover this in my book. There are plenty of countries that have a multi-party system and it's massive corruption, massive election corruption. It's about the money in politics. We could have a 2-party system, a 3-party system, a 4-party system, a 5-party system. If you still have this money in politics, Citizens United, it's just going to be 5 other corrupt political parties. So when people say that, I'm kind of like, when I look at this from a worldwide perspective, Brazil's a great example. They have several parties. They have rife with election corruption. But here's where I'm with you, and I say this in my book: the Tea Party, the MAGA cult. What did they do? To your point, they didn't say, let's create a third party. They said, we are going to take over the Republican Party. That's what I want us to do. I want us to because our power is in the Democratic Party. I want us to infiltrate and take over the Democratic Party the way they took over the GOP. You have people who are insurrectionists who ran for office and won. Insurrectionists. And side note, I'll say, if you want to do a third party option, maybe try getting elected locally, like the Working Families Party in New York. Get elected locally. Don't go straight to the frickin', presidency, with all due respect, talking to Dr. Cornel West. It just seems like a grift, if you will. But I want us to take over. We could take over Mississippi. We could take over Louisiana. We had a phenomenal candidate down there, Gary Chambers. Mike Espy should have won in Mississippi. I want us to infiltrate. I don't want us to your point, I don't want us to disengage when we don't get what we want. I want us to engage more when we don't get what we want. So whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 party, if we have low voter turnout, it doesn't really matter. And then you have the massive money in politics. It's a struggle. So my issue is, let's take a blueprint, a page from their blueprint, and take over. They don't want a third party. I'm going to take over the entire Republican Party and wipe out anybody who was remotely credible. That's what the Southern strategy was. Barry Goldwater, Nixon. So just a little point.
And what's powerful about that, every state and region needs something different. So there's no one third party option, even, because what you need in New York is going to be different than what you need in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, North Carolina, California. If we do what you're saying, then every region now gets their needs met. Is the migrant issue as big in Maryland as it is in Texas or New York or Arizona? Like, we need to have that. I think it's possible, it's doable, but it also requires, to Charles's point, patience, because we're going to have to cultivate candidates. We're looking for the Messiah. Yes, Wes Moore might be the Messiah, but then what? After, all right, then what? Yes, they don't even care. They got Marjorie Taylor Greene, Boebert, Matt Gaetz. These people are not just not qualified, they are not good human beings. They do not care, because they're going to push their agenda through these characters, and it works.